Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Welcome everybody today, and thank you so much for joining us here at Regent Park in Toronto Centre. I'm Victoria Galley, and I'm so pleased to introduce the leader of the Green Party of Canada, Annamie Paul.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Recording in
Thank you
progress.
for being with us here in beautiful Regent Park. As I said, I was going to take you on a tour of my community, which I love very much. This is part of a revitalization project. It's an incredibly diverse community. It's an incredibly central community here in Toronto Centre. And I'm very, very pleased to be here today and to introduce some of Canada to this part of Toronto Centre. Merci d'être ici avec nous aujourd'hui à Toronto Centre, ici dans la communauté de Regent Park. C'est une communauté énormément diverse avec des gens qui viennent de tous les coins du monde. Et je suis énormément fière d'être ici aujourd'hui et vous introduire à cette communauté. Today, we are here on day 3 of the election. An election which, as I have said before, is selfish and reckless and opportunistic, not only because it is unfolding during a rising fourth wave of pandemic, not only because it is occurring against the backdrop of forest fires that have forced thousands of residents of BC to flee their homes, but it is also happening as our friends in Afghanistan need our help most of all. Alors, c'est une élection qui se déroule dans les circonstances énormément graves. Une de ces circonstances, c'est la situation qui se déroule en ce moment en Afghanistan. For some background, we must remember that Canada made a solemn commitment in late 2001 to join the U.S. coalition following the terrorist attack that occurred on the United States on September 11th, 2001, almost 20 years ago. We knew then, as we know now, the danger that the Taliban poses and posed to global security. And we also knew what Taliban rule looked like and what it had meant to the women and girls in Afghanistan. As of today, the Taliban has captured all the major cities in Afghanistan, including the capital, Kabul. The Taliban's advance has been swift, it has been merciless, and we have witnessed the complete recapture of that country by the Taliban. Toutes les villes majeures sont dans les mains du Taliban. Ils ont agi d'une manière énormément rapide et maintenant, le pays d'Afghanistan est dans les mains du Taliban. Our military, when they were called, answered that call. More than 40,000 Canadian military personnel served in Afghanistan. Almost, we believe, it's certainly at least 160 soldiers died in Afghanistan. Thousands more were wounded and live with the consequences of those wounds to this very day. Canada's military deployment in Afghanistan was one of the most significant in our history. All of the work that these brave people, these brave military personnel did, risks being undone without swift, decisive, coordinated international action. The question now is, will we allow their sacrifice to be in vain? And there were so many helpers. The government knew months in advance that the U.S. was withdrawing, yet it did not spring into action. despite the mounting danger to all the Afghans who had worked with Canadian diplomats and troops over the 20 years of our deployment. And to quote one veteran that was quoted in CBC today, when he talks about the Afghan helpers, we'd have language assistance from the villages that we patrolled sometimes, and they would patrol with ski masks in 60-degree Celsius weather just to hide their identity so they could help us. This was in the hopes that maybe they would one day get a ticket to Canada. And I believe that almost every service person that was deployed to Afghanistan has a similar story to tell us about the help. Women and girls are particularly at risk. Under Taliban rule from 1996 to 2001, women and girls were barred from attending school or working outside of the home. 14 million women and girls are now under the control of the Taliban. There are reports of rampant war crimes, including public beatings and flogging of women, sexual violence, and forced marriage, all of which have occurred in the areas captured by the Taliban. Les femmes et les filles sont en risque. On sait ce que c'est de vivre sous un régime taliban. On sait l'impact sur les femmes et les filles. I worked for a number of years in international affairs as a diplomat. I worked as the director of one of the leading conflict prevention organizations focused on the loss of life, focused on preventing loss of civilian life during deadly conflict. And through colleagues on the ground, I am hearing and reading regular reports regarding the targeting, threatening, kidnapping, torturing, and assassinations of women for their work defending and promoting democracy, equality, higher education, and human rights. And who are these women who are the targets of the Taliban? They are leaders, they are activists, they are human rights defenders, they are parliamentarians, they are journalists, and they are being hunted by the Taliban, hunted by Taliban fighters, going house to house with their names. The question now is, will we abandon these brave women and girls to their fate? Again, this is something that strikes particularly close to home. I mentioned this yesterday. My husband, who has provided technical support on the human rights aspects of the peace negotiations with the Taliban, has many friends and many colleagues who are there, who are writing and texting every single day. And they are saying that there are very few avenues open left for people to flee what they believe is going to be a massacre at the hands of the Taliban. Alors, le Canada doit trouver une manière de protéger tous ceux qui a nous aidés, tous les personnels qui nous a aidés. Il n'y a pas de question de les abandonner dans leur moment, dans leur pays. And so concretely, what steps must be taken? There are several steps that is clear must be taken, and we have to remember that the first few days when you're looking at a military takeover of a country like this are incredibly critical to save lives and also to signal to the Taliban what our intentions are. And so first, we may, before making any diplomatic recognition of the Taliban, it must be conditional upon verifiable proof that there is observance of the laws of war and fundamental human rights, and that includes the rights of the women and girls in the country. We know that the government has said that they have no plans to do that after reversing and saying that they were going to wait and see. It's simply not good enough. The government of Canada must release its own statement to that effect. Alors, il faut avoir une déclaration claire que avant la reconnaissance diplomatique du Taliban, les conditions doivent être la vérification de la protection des droits de la personne, des droits des femmes et filles, et des droits de guerre. Second, we must secure the airport. It has to be safe. It has to be operational. At this time, the Taliban, and these are the reports again, you know, just as I was coming here, my husband and I were receiving reports from the ground from the ground, from colleagues on the ground, saying that the Taliban has set up checkpoints around the airports, so people can't get into the airports without having to go through the Taliban first. And so they have and we don't have any information that the governments of Canada or the United States has been working on safely being able to transport people to the airport and through those checkpoints. So it's simply not enough to say, find a way. If you can get to the airport, then you may be able to get on a flight and you may be able to get out. We need to make sure that they can get there. And then we need to streamline the paperwork, the process to allow for the fastest relocation to Canada. We heard yesterday that 807 Afghans had been evacuated under a special immigration program. We know that that is just a tiny fraction of those who need our help. And don't be mistaken. Read the fine print. The 20,000 individuals that the government said it was targeting for relocation to Canada have already fled Afghanistan. They are already out. We are talking about what the government of Canada is going to do for all of those who have been left behind. Alors, il faut assurer qu'on a un processus efficace et rapide pour aider les gens à sortir de l'Afghanistan d'une manière le plus rapide possible. Et il faut être clair que les 20 000 personnes qui ont été ciblées pour l'immigration ici au Canada, ce sont des personnes qui sont déjà hors du pays. Ils sont déjà hors du pays. On parle maintenant des gens qui restent en Afghanistan. The people of Canada deserve to know today the entire plan of the Prime Minister to do all of these things that have been outlined here. And his government must be held accountable, election or no election. While the Taliban, and why is this? Because while the Taliban was surrounding Kabul, the Liberal government was putting the finishing touches on their election campaign instead of focusing on that situation. And just as Kabul fell, and while our coalition, translators, helpers, and supporters were fleeing for their lives, the Prime Minister was striding to Rideau Hall to call an election. And while UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson was recalling Parliament for an emergency response, our Prime Minister was dissolving ours. So yesterday I said that I believed that it was possible for the Governor General to summon Parliament, even though it had been dissolved, to summon Parliament for an emergency debate and to discuss our response to the evolving situation in Afghanistan. I said that under the Emergencies Act, we see that there is a provision that allows the Governor General to make a summons even when Parliament has been dissolved. That act doesn't apply to this situation, but it shows that we have contemplated what do we do when Parliament has been dissolved and we have an emergency, national or international. What do we do? There must be a way for us to craft a response. There must be a way for government to respond. And so that is what we are proposing here. And if this is not the way to do it, if there are alternatives, then now is the time that we step forward and talk about what they are. Because the goal must be to protect Afghan civilians, to ensure global security in honor of the sacrifices that have been made. Because at the end of the day, when Canada makes a promise, we should keep it. The world should be able to count on that. This should matter to Canadians because we must always, and we have always committed to honoring the service of our military, and we will never willingly let their sacrifices be in vain. We must care as Canadians about what is happening in Afghanistan because we will not abandon our friends in their greatest time of need when they have risked their lives to help us. And when the Prime Minister said back in 2015 that Canada was back, many people around the world believed him and trusted us. We cannot betray that faith that they placed in us when it is needed the most. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This ends today's Facebook Live portion of the event, and now we will go to questions from the ground, beginning with David Thurton from CBC.
Hi, good afternoon,
Hello.
Madam Paul. Thanks for taking our questions. Prime Minister, the Liberal leader, Justin Trudeau, is now saying that the government has no plans to recognize the Taliban as the government of Afghanistan, after his Foreign Affairs Minister said on CBC yesterday that they would take a wait-and-see approach. So, would the Greens, if you formed government, would you recognize the Taliban as the official government of Afghanistan?
Absolutely not. And, I think that given the confusion between the statements of Justin Trudeau and the Foreign Affairs Minister, that everyone deserves and needs some clarification. The Taliban, under no circumstances, should be recognized as the legitimate government of Afghanistan. It should not be given any diplomatic recognition whatsoever until it is able to assure the international community in a verifiable way that it will respect the laws of war, that it will respect the rights of all of the people in Afghanistan, that it will respect fundamental human rights. And again, it has to do that in a verifiable way. We have no reason to believe that that is going to happen. As I said, as we speak, the Taliban is going door to door looking for human rights defenders, activists, journalists, parliamentarians. They are blocking those same people from getting to the airport. But that has to be the absolute minimum condition for Canada to recognize the Taliban as the legitimate government of Afghanistan. En français ou non?
No, I'm
okay.
good.
All right.
But if you want to, you could go en français.
Non, c'est juste pour souligner encore une fois que le gouvernement doit être clair. Notre ministre d'Affaires étrangères a dit que on va attendre et évaluer la situation avant de décider si nous allons reconnaître le gouvernement, le Taliban comme le gouvernement légitime. Et puis, Monsieur Trudeau a dit que il n'a pas de plan de le faire. Il faut être clair et on devrait faire une déclaration très claire que notre gouvernement ne va pas reconnaître le gouvernement, c'est pas le gouvernement, le Taliban comme le gouvernement légitime, s'il n'y a pas une manière de confirmer la protection des droits de la personne, de les femmes, de les filles, de tous les gens qui sont en Afghanistan, et aussi assurer que les lois de guerre vont être respectées.
I want to ask you about childcare. The Liberals have been campaigning on their promise to cut childcare fees in half by next year, and then within the next 5 years, get them down to $10 a day. The Conservatives have promised, are campaigning on, scrapping that and providing, giving the money directly to families, giving them tax incentives to pay for their childcare and to determine what that looks like for them. Mm-hmm. So we're curious, what are the Greens proposing when it comes to childcare?
Well, the Greens have been very consistent on the need for universal childcare for a very, very long time. Our point of view has always been that every stage of development, of educational development for a person, should be accessible. It should be without fees. It should be universal. And so when it comes to childcare, we believe absolutely in universal childcare. It is long overdue. And frankly, if it was a priority for the Liberal government, then they would never have called this election. It's one thing to sign a memo of understanding in theory. It's another thing to actually get the work done and get the childcare out. Because we're standing in a community where people pay thousands of dollars to send their kids to childcare, where women lost their jobs during the pandemic because they had no childcare options. And so people need the help now. They don't need a teaser and then an election, as the bait to vote for a particular party.
Thank you. We'll now go to questions
on the ground. We will now be going to our Zoom with Press Secretary Rosie Emery for the Green Party of Canada for virtual questions.
Hi, thank you, Victoria. So we'll start with questions online. If you would like to ask a question, please use the raised hand feature. On va commencer avec les questions sur le virtual, la Zoom. Si vous voulez utiliser la fonction de lever la main, si vous voulez poser une question. On va commencer avec Kevin Gallagher de CTV News. We'll start with Kevin Gallagher, CTV News. Go ahead, Kevin, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you for taking my question. I'd like to know, there's a pretty fierce debate going on right now about mandatory vaccinations for federal workers, requiring vaccinations for people who are traveling domestically, for rail and airlines. Where do you stand on this issue, Ms. Paul?
First, I would say I don't know about the very fierce debate. I know that the Liberal Party is trying to manufacture one in order to distract people, again, from the fact that we shouldn't be in this election in the first place. There is a tremendous consensus amongst people in Canada that vaccinations save lives, that vaccinations work, that vaccinations are a critical part of our strategy for defeating COVID-19 and for exiting from this pandemic. There's tremendous consensus about that. So in terms of how we reflect that in policy, we know full well, and we heard Mr. Trudeau say this yesterday, that of course there are going to be exceptions to that. Of course there are going to be people that for one reason or another will not be able to be caught up in anything that is mandatory. And so let's say what those things are. I'm very interested to see what the plan is. I know that there are going to have to be ways to test people that for one reason or another can't be vaccinated. We should never turn a public health issue into a political football. And I think it is very disappointing to see that Mr. Trudeau has done that.
Do you have a follow-up, Kevin, please?
Yes, but I still want to know where you stand on making it mandatory. So are you saying that it shouldn't be required? It only, like that's essentially the Conservative position, right? That it should be encouraged, but not required, and that testing and screening would fill in for those who either for health reasons can't get vaccinated or who choose not to for other reasons. So, where do you stand on the choice of being vaccinated? Should that be something that is mandated by the government? That's where the debate is.
Again, there is even the Liberals and Mr. Trudeau have backtracked on that. We know absolutely, our public health officials know and have acknowledged from the very beginning that there are going to be a significant number of people in Canada that for one reason or another are not going to be vaccinated. And so we need to have an alternative for those people that ensures that that they are safe, that their communities are safe, that the public is safe. Vaccinations work. Vaccinations are safe. Vaccinations are a critical part of our defeat of COVID-19, and we're all looking forward to that. It's going to get us through this fourth wave. Every person who is eligible to be vaccinated should be vaccinated, and of course, every level of government is going to need to come up with a plan for those who are not able to be vaccinated. There's simply no way around it. And so I would like to see the details of what is being proposed by the government, because dollars to donuts, there is going to be an alternative for people who are not able to be vaccinated.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Ms. Paul. Are there any other questions from the Zoom? You would like to ask a question, please put the raised hand feature. Okay, no, so we'll go back to the ground. I believe David Thurton has another question.
Perhaps just before that, if there is one, I also wanted to stress again that, we're a party of solutions. And when it comes to Afghanistan, we are actively thinking about what can we do and how can we get as robust a response from Canada as possible. I would like us to engage as quickly as possible in a consideration of whether Parliament can be summoned. And if it cannot be summoned, what comes next? I think that every single leader of the major federal parties would welcome the opportunity to have a debate on this subject. There was a time in Canada when we didn't just have one debate in English and one debate in French, and try to compress every policy area into that tiny period of time. We would have debates on very important issues of the day, standalone issues. Afghanistan is one of those issues, and I invite all of the leaders of all of the other federal parties to join me in a debate on Afghanistan so that they can see the plans that each party has on Afghanistan, and also see whether we can find common ground as quickly as possible on Afghanistan so that we can again help those people that we committed to help in Afghanistan and respect the contribution and sacrifice of our military personnel.
Let's do a question on the ground for follow-up. Back to David Thurton with CBC News.
This is the advantage of being on the ground.
Yeah, showing up is 90% of the work, right?
That's right.
Okay, I just wanted to kind of ask you a question about something that the Bloc is proposing. So Bloc leader Yves-François Blanchet is proposing to give Alberta billions of dollars as long as they use it to transition away from fossil fuels. And so we'd just like to get your take on that. Is that something that you would like to see? Is that something that the government needs to be actively pursuing right now, making sure, that we need to cut Alberta a check to help them transition away from fossil fuels? A big check, it sounds.
I love questions about the green recovery and our green future. I'm always ready to answer those. Actually, at my launch the other day, I didn't get to introduce all of my family who had come, but my brother was there, and my brother, until about halfway through the second wave of the pandemic, was working as a roughneck out on the oil crews in Alberta. And then his job disappeared. And we know all about that boom and bust cycle out in Alberta. We know that economic diversification is the way of the future. We know that we have reached, for many different reasons, the peak decade for oil out in Alberta. And so whenever we talk about this, and whenever I talk about it, I'm thinking about my brother and the people that served on his crew. I'm thinking about their communities, and I'm thinking about how many times successive governments have let them down and have promised the moon and said that this is going to go on forever, and then it all falls apart and the communities fall apart and they get displaced. And I only have to say, remember what happened out east to the cod fisheries. So this is the time to diversify. This is the time absolutely to invest billions of dollars into Alberta, into green technology, into green infrastructure, into the jobs of the future. They pay more. They're immediately transferable. They're more sustainable. They get you home to your family at the end of the day. They're safer. These are the jobs of the future for Albertans. And they have said in polling, they have said they know that there's no conflict between the climate and the economy. So any government at any level that is thinking laser focused on the people of Alberta is going to be talking about the greatest economic opportunity of our lifetime, and that is a green recovery and a green economy.
And so, I mean, is there a dollar figure that you would put behind that? Is there an amount that you would say that this is how much we need to be investing in Alberta and other oil producing provinces as well to help them transition?
We are absolutely costing that, and I'm very excited I will be very excited. I'm anticipating it, so I'm already excited to share our plan for our green future and to share the details of how we are going to make the investments in Alberta, in other regions, other provinces and regions that are heavily dependent upon the fossil fuel sector, and how, I must say that it always perplexes me why this isn't the story for all of the parties, because Alberta is actually front of the line for the advantages of a green economy. Solar power, wind power, geothermal power, the incredibly talented and incredibly well-educated workforce that is out in Alberta. Alberta could be and should be the juggernaut in Canada for the green economy, and it can be. So this is the moment again for political parties to think beyond this election cycle and to think about the future. And as I said, to remain laser focused on the people of Alberta, people like my brother, who want a future and who we can't afford to leave behind, not even, for a second.
That concludes today's press conference with the leader of the Green Party of Canada, Annamie Paul. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you for listening today, and thank you for supporting us with our sponsors. Please go to depictions.media for more information and click on our contact link and let us know how we can help bring your story and help bring us to a better world. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.